and you sing the bridge 46 times until you're holy or until everyone goes home.
Hello and welcome to Deconstructing Worship, a series of positive and constructive conversations about the current culture of modern worship. We are your hosts, Steve Quantick
and Kyle Treble.
Okay, welcome to Deconstructing Worship. Great to have you here. And this week, our guest is Bryn. Woo!
Yeah.
I mean, we do this every week, Carl, don't we? We do the kind of clapping and applause and everything, and just eventually.
I feel like I need to do something else. Let's give him a bit of a wolf whistle.
Yeah, exactly. Ooh,
Not telling my wife. Don't tell my wife.
Bryn, it's so good to have you on the podcast, mate. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me. My name's Bryn. I'm from North Wales. I currently live in South Wales. I'm a musician. I went to uni in Newport, South Wales, to study creative sound and music, whatever that means. I still don't know. I've been going to church since I was minus 9 months old. And I started to play music when I was about 13, 14, maybe, when all my friends started getting into various bands and all learning how to play guitar. And yeah, ever since then, I've been playing music, playing worship music.
That's awesome, dude. So when because I've known you like a really long time now. Like when you think about it, I'm like, wow, that's like a really long time.
You think it's a really long time, but I don't know. It's only 13 years.
I mean, it's still quite long.
It's quite a long time. I think when you hit over a decade with a friendship.
So, I'm just going to ask you, because obviously when I met you, you were already like playing in worship bands. So when did you start playing in kind of like a worship context?
When I started playing music, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
Initially, I was not a very good player. So when I was about 14, maybe a bit later, 14, 15, me and my friends from church, we got together and we were like, all right, we're starting a band. One guy played the guitar and one guy, Joe Taylor. Even when we were like 13, 14, he was an incredible drummer. So we kind of got together and they were like, oh, we need a singer. So I was like, oh, I can sing. And like, I could not sing. But yeah, we started a band from church, the 4 guys who are like in our sort of age group, called Ark of the Covenant.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, that was my first real experience of like playing music, and it was kind of in a Christian context anyway. And then obviously I started to learn guitar, and then I started to get involved with the band in the church in North Wales, which is AOG Pentecostal, which did have a really good kind of worship band when I was 10, 11, and it kind of started to progressively get a little bit less good as I started to learn. I think once I started to learn a few things about music, I was like, okay, maybe we're doing something that's not quite working.
Okay.
But it's hard in a place where volunteers, it's volunteers, isn't it? It's not professional musicians.
Yeah.
You just volunteer and you say, yeah, I can do a thing. And someone goes, okay, you're doing that thing.
Yeah. It's a funny kind of like dichotomy, isn't it? Like you want it to be like the very best it can. But for the majority of churches, obviously, like you've got the big churches that can afford to employ musicians and things like that. And that's amazing. That's awesome as well. And obviously, if you're going to be employed as a musician, and if you're like an employer, you want to make sure you employ the best person you can find. And obviously like heart and stuff like that has a lot to do with it, or I hope it has a lot to do with it. But when you're like, you're dealing with like volunteers, then it's very different, because most who are like people volunteering to play in worship bands in churches have full-time jobs, and they don't have the time to be putting into like, or they don't have much time to be putting into stuff like that. So it's kind of like this, it's a beautiful thing, because like, even if it isn't this miraculous, amazing kind of crazy musical stuff, if the heart's right, it's like, wow. But then you as a musician, then there's that side of you then that kind of, you go, yeah,
we could play it better. Yeah, definitely.
So I guess when you went to university, what was then your kind of church experience like then, and how did you kind of get involved in? Did you get involved in the worship team at the church at university you ended up at?
Yeah, that's where I met Kyle. We used to go to church in Newport, and initially I said to them, they were like, "Oh, what can you play?" And I was like, "Oh, I play a bit of this and a bit of that," and they put me on
all the things.
They put me on keys. They put me on keys.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, and I'm like, I don't play the keys. But I was like, yeah, I can play the keys. Sure. In all honesty, I should have said, well, I'm a worship leader. But I don't know, I guess when you're sort of 17, 18, and there's a big, massive team of a bunch of musicians who are, really a lot better than you are, you don't just come in and say, oh, this is what I do. I felt like, oh, I can do this, or, serve in a bit of any way that I can. Whereas maybe I should have just been like, all right, this is the role that I want to be in. And then it would have been a lot easier to be like, right, if that's what you want to do, you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to learn more. You're going to have to, sit beside the guy who leads worship right now, come in on a Sunday early and, but there almost was never opportunity to do that. And I think for me, for the future, maybe like, if my son ever learns guitar and if he wants to play worship, I'd be like, right, what do you actually want to do? And we sit down and we work on what you actually want to do instead of beating around the bush and then 5 years later, oh, you're supposed to be a worship leader, right?
Yeah, it's almost this like kind of, you feel like you have to have this like kind of false humility sort of thing of like, oh, I don't want to say that I want to do that because it's almost like frowned upon to want to do something, like where like even like scripturally it says to like it's a good thing to desire like leadership. It says it's a good thing. Do you know what I mean? Like if you've got the right heart and the reason behind it is like admirable, then why not? Like, but I think we are taught a lot, especially like in the past, we're taught that like wanting that stuff is a bad thing.
I think we're almost being over-taught submission to authority. Yeah. Like yes, submission under authority of the church setting is great. Like I'm a firm believer in that. You should respect the person who's in authority. Yes,
of course.
But that doesn't mean you can't question what they do, and that doesn't mean you can't say to them, "This is what I want to do." At the time, I was just saying yes to things. And people would ask me, oh, can you do this? And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I can do that. Oh, can you do this? And I'd be like, yeah, I can do that. And then, 3 years later, once I'd finished uni and I was saying yes to everything, I was like, I can't do everything. But I almost couldn't say then because I'd spent 3 years saying yes to everything.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, like coming from my side of like things, like obviously because we kind of grew a bit of a friendship like when we first met. And for me, as like seeing you as your role in the church, you were like the guy who would do the things that needed to be done. So like if, the drummer can't make it this week, Bryn, can you fill in? Yeah, sure. Or like the guitarist can't do it this week. Oh, Bryn, can you fill in? And it's like, yeah, sure. And like you would do those roles tremendously. And then I remember when you first started, or remember when I first started seeing you lead worship, as in like from the traditional sense of view of like singing and with a guitar. I remember being like, I didn't know Bryn did that. And I'd known you for a good couple of years then.
So you've talked about how you were at church from a very young age, like from when you were born, really. And then, there was that moment when you were a teenager where you started playing in the worship team. So what was kind of the first experience you remember of congregational worship in that kind of interim time?
I don't think I could pinpoint a specific memory because my memories from when I was 10 to 15 are very, very blurry. But yeah, there was the music that we used to play in the AOG was really like, it's a Pentecostal church. They used to play upbeat music. They used to play, the quite modern songs, the new Hillsong stuff that was coming out, all that type of stuff. And yeah, they were actually a really, really good band at the time, from what I remember. But yeah, we used to go to a Methodist thing every Easter as well. We used to go a different place every year. It's called Easter People. It's sort of similar thing to Spring Harvest. But yeah, they used to be this band who used to lead the worship there called Why Friday.
I remember Why Friday.
It was so good.
So that's mainly where I started kind of, we used to go to this thing called they used to call it the Fringe, and it used to be on like a Friday or a Saturday night of those 2 weeks of Easter. And they used to have like different bands come in, they used to play like you would almost in a club, but like they play in a church venue or a venue in one of the theaters or stuff like that. Yeah, and I remember specifically why Friday being this worship band at the time. They were just a small little group of guys who used to lead worship at those events. And yeah, that's always stayed with me. And I'm like, even though it's kind of not corporate, it's not a corporate like church setting. It was really one of those things that I thought, man, these guys and they were a good band outside of even leading worship. When they started writing songs and they started releasing actual albums. But yeah, as far as church goes, I think there's not many times that I could remember because we used to go every single week.
Look in there, right? So talking about like experiences that you that stick out to you, what affected you about those experiences?
I think it's they had a really kind of specific message, man. This isn't just, they're not just playing music here. There's something else going on that's not just happening in the physical, and I think people who listen to secular music, they almost think it's just music. We listen to music, it sounds good, we have a good time, but when you actually sit down and listen to the lyrics that somebody's taken time and taken care to write, and they actually want to tell you something, it's a much different thing. That really sticks out to me, and it was like you could just sit there and just soak in, and it's just the presence of God was on that band.
That sounds awesome. That's amazing. You're right. And it's because I'll see, I love bands like Snarky Puppy we were talking about earlier, and loads of bands where the musicianship is just crazy talented. And don't get me wrong, I love them. And I've been to see them, and it's it's such an amazing experience. I remember this one time seeing Snarky, the energy was, it was crazy. Everyone was jumping off the wall, and it was such a great experience. But it's different. You can't put words to it. It is different, isn't it? I'll go to see worship conference or whatever, and it's just, I don't know. It is just different. It's the way you interact with it, and it's the presence of God is the thing that changes it, isn't it? It comes from this. It's this piece of music that's amazing and wonderful and beautiful and awesome, and now it's just transcended into something else.
Yeah, transcendent is the word that I was going to use, to be honest, mate, because I think it's quite obviously it's quite simple in a way, isn't it? In that it would make sense, logical sense, that an act of creativity that is connected with the source of creativity would have more of an impact. I suppose purposefully and intentionally connected to, because let's face it, a lot of these other kind of bands and artists that I believe they would have transcendent moments too,
Oh, for sure. I've experienced stuff like that so many times.
Yeah, they wouldn't necessarily recognize or give credit to God in that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think God is still kind of glorified, in the sense that, from the point of view that, I believe that there is something that connects, that moment of connection can, I think, lead people to God. It can lead people to think that there is something more. There is something that transcends our experience. But yeah,
I remember going to see Angels and Airwaves in London. It was a festival thing. I think it was called Give It a Name, and there was a load of bands there, and you had people like Yellow Card and lots of different acts. And Angels came on, and it was after their first album release. And I remember going to see them. They came on, and the atmosphere changed. It was weird, like you were talking. It was it transcended music, And it wasn't because they were playing anything necessarily like better than the other bands. Like, I know there's lots of people there that didn't really like Angels and Airwaves above other bands there and stuff, but like the atmosphere changed. It was amazing. And me and Helen were just like talking about it after, and we were like, that was worship. Like we entered into something then, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
What would you say, Bryn, is your favourite thing about congregational worship?
I think that my favourite thing about congregational worship is leading people into that presence. That's what I always felt that my calling was. That's what, you know, a lot of other people, I'm sure Kyle would probably agree. He'd say, yeah, when you've led worship in the past, there's just something about the way that you do it, and the way that you know, a lot of people have said that to me, like the way that you usher in the presence of God is just it's a little bit different to how other people would do it. And you plan to do a certain thing, and I'd always be the one who was like, yeah, this thing isn't working, so we're going to do this. And then everyone goes, why are we doing this? Please? What are we playing? And I'd just be like, this is what we're playing. This is what we need to play right now. And it's always a case of, you know, you've got to gauge how the congregation are feeling, or, you know, how they're responding to what the band is doing. And then you've got to obviously make a plan. But if that plan isn't working, are you and as well, are you confident in the way that the band is going to respond to what you put out? Because obviously you can't just put out something they don't have any idea about, unless you're like, right, we've discussed, maybe it'll go here, maybe it'll go there, maybe this song. But yeah,
Hey guys, we're going to go into 9/8 now. Is that all right?
Yeah. What song are we playing? I've never played that in my life.
But it's just about kind of just being sensitive, isn't it? Sensitive to the spirit, like, because it's so important. Of like, you obviously having an agenda is really good. Like, you need to have a plan. Like coming in kind of half cocked isn't.
Yeah,
like, I mean,
no
sometimes
good for
that'll work, because I mean, God will like take over and do his thing, but he wants us to come with excellence and to bring our very best. But you need to be willing to kind of just, okay, the Spirit's not leading me there. I need to completely to do a 180 on my plan, and let's go somewhere else. So like, that gets me thinking about like just making sure that each member, including like ourselves, is that we're working on our craft, and we're making sure that we are at a level where, I say, like, we don't have to be kind of like crazy talents. Like we're talking at the beginning, like the majority of musicians are volunteers. But there is that sort of like, there's that beckoning forward into a bit more of a maturity of going, right, I need to make sure that I am working on my craft so that if and when the Spirit needs me to change what I'm doing, I can, instead of it just going, and it's a train wreck.
There's kind of two things to draw out there, isn't it? Like, just to kind of call back to previous episodes. We talked a bit, and I think in the first episode, about rehearsing spontaneity, didn't we? Which I think is, you know, sounds like a contradiction in terms, but like you say, that's just kind of like being kind of so ready in your craft. But then, like, you know, in the whole excellence versus flow and responsiveness argument, I think that's what we've hit upon there, actually, is how you balance the two, right? Because, you know, the answer isn't like, well, we've prepared this with excellence, so we stick to the plan. And the answer isn't, we have prepared nothing, so, you know,
see what happens.
So, you know, see what happens. The answer is somewhere in between. Like, you know, maybe the answer is to prepare, but to be willing to throw aside what has been prepared, you know?
Yeah, and like you were saying, it is just, the most important thing is just being willing to, and be humble enough to go, God, what do you want to happen here? Because like you don't know, like you said, like talking back to what you said about what your actual favorite thing about congregational worship is, and it is that you love kind of ushering people into the presence of God, or that awareness of the presence of God, because like his presence never grows or diminishes. Like it's that kind of humility then to go, okay, right, I need to listen to you, I need to be listening to you, and that means I need to make sure that I'm able to go those places. So I completely agree with you. That's awesome.
So, in terms of your original music, Bryn, like so I listened to some of your stuff this afternoon before we came on. It's not kind of traditional congregational worship. it's certainly something else, isn't it? It's like, it kind of it has kind of like an urgency and energy to it that I really liked, and had some lovely, lovely noisy guitars, which obviously I respond to. So how did you when you started making your own music, how did you end up there instead of ending up at writing congregational worship songs?
I think a lot of it is just due to influence. Like I draw a lot of influence, from the old sort of 2000 Kerrang era, which is like,
yes,
it's what we. I don't know how old you are, but I know that Kyle used to listen to that stuff. We used to listen to Blink-182, The Offspring, Linkin Park.
I still listen to Blink-182.
Limp Bizkit, all those kind of like bands that were sort of breaking the mold at the time, and they were putting their like own spin on it. I listen now to a lot of band called Enter Shikari. I really love their stuff, and I actually really love the like political side of that stuff, kind of as well. I think it's a very important time for us to like start speaking about that stuff through our music, and I've got a few songs that are, they probably wouldn't play them on BBC at the moment because they're a bit, too political. It's not so much anti-establishment, but it's like
it's anti-oppression, isn't it? But like that's so Jesus. Do you know what I mean? Like that is, I think like if you like Davey was saying in episode 2, like Jesus was a punk. Do you know what I mean? Like really, if you think about it, like he was, he fought against the establishment that was oppressing people and hurting people, and like I think like if you kind of go, okay, like if Jesus was to be in a band, those are the bands he's gonna be in. Like he's gonna be writing lyrics that are gonna be like,
exactly.
like anti-oppression and things like that. So, dude, I like listen. I obviously being your friend as well. I've had privy to like some of your stuff before you've released it, which is really cool. And dude, I love it. Like you're speaking about some really important stuff. So off the back of that, and kind of piggyback on what Steve was saying as well. Obviously, you've gone in that more direction of writing the way you are. How do you find? Because I know you've written worship songs before, haven't you? Like more kind of your more traditional worship stuff.
Yeah.
What's your experience between the two? Like, and like, how do you like? Obviously, I wouldn't say like what's your favorite one to write, because obviously I guess it's the more stuff that you're doing now. But like, what is the difference and experience that you have between those two types of writing?
For me anyway, I think it's a lot more difficult for you to write congregational songs because you have to write on a specific thing. You almost don't have full liberty of what you want to do because there's a certain style that you have to play in. Almost, it's like the law of Hillsong, right? You don't go against the law of Hillsong. You play your intro, you play your verse, you play one chorus, you play another verse, you play two choruses, and you play a bridge. And you sing the bridge 46 times until you're holy or until everyone goes home. So you
missed out. The first chorus has to be a down chorus, Bryn. The formula was
that's why none of my songs are making it.
That's it. I fixed it for you.
Hitting the down chorus.
It has to be a down chorus.
It was the down chorus. That was it. Everything else was perfect, dude.
But yeah,
exactly.
I do think it's a very tricky thing to do because obviously you're almost limited. It's like you want to kind of, in a sense, usher in the presence of God, but like it's almost illegal for us to do that in a different way.
Yeah, like we've almost put like stylistic preferences on lists on there, like being like the key holder of God's presence.
That's because church has to be inclusive. You're trying to be all things for everyone. You're not like specifically us three. We could probably go to a church that has high tempo, heavy guitars, big drums, and we'd be like, I'm never leaving this church. I'm just gonna stay here. And we're going to play 24 hours of this music. You have to incorporate people who are 10 years old and you have to incorporate people who are possibly 90 years old, you know?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? It's such a hard kind of thing to, like, trying to figure out what's the best way forward, isn't it? 'Cause like, don't get me wrong, like, and you probably agree, and we've said this many times, but like, there are some amazing songs that are in this kind of more, like you say, modern church CCM style. There's some beautiful, amazing stuff, and like God has spoken to me so much through it. But like you said, it is. And like we spoke, like we were talking about before, it's like, it's, what did you say, Steve? I can't remember what episode it was, but it was like,
Spacey rock.
Spacey rock, yeah. Spacey rock. And it's like delicious, but vanilla. Like it's very delicious, but it is vanilla. But it's how do you navigate creating a style of worship? Because like, no matter which way you look at it, there has to be a style. Like, how do you navigate creating a style that is, it will include the kid, but it also will include the 90-year-old, and it will include the heavy metal head. It will include the dude who's into hip hop. Like, it's, how do you do it? It's almost impossible, isn't it?
I honestly, I don't think you can. And I think that's why, like, the church has almost settled on this kind of spacey rock style, right? Is because it is something. You've got a little bit of guitar in there. Yeah, you've got some nice little licks in there. You've got a little solo maybe now and then. That caters to us, you know? You've got that really nice space for the people who they just want to soak in that presence when you hit that keys, you know? You hit the keys and...
Holy Spirit pads.
Yeah, the pads. The spirit pads. Spirit fingers. You know, and you get that kind of, you know, spacey feeling like you did almost from the old traditional hymn sort of side, where it's just piano and singing. You know, it's almost like we've settled on this all-inclusive style, which is, it's good, but like for musicians like us who are like maybe a bit, you know, more on a heavier side, it's a bit like, oh, but it's just a bit boring.
Which almost then becomes non-inclusive, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. You could almost say, like, for example, that, like, when I was growing up and I was really into Muse, right, and I'd listen to like Origin of Symmetry on loop forever, and now they've become like, I think, you know, like there's a separate discussion about how much their style has changed, but ultimately they are a mainstream act now. But I think that's because, you know, they have like a really broad following. They sell out stadiums and arenas and things like that. And I think there's something to be said about how people's musical tastes evolve over time. So I don't know, maybe we're not giving people enough credit because we are still playing in the same musical style. We've been playing in the same musical style of worship for at least a decade, right? You know, I mean, if that, you know, more, maybe more. I mean, something we've talked about on the podcast before, I'd love to, because for one thing, having heard your music, and I would love to hear, you know, even if it is the kind of Hillsong worship, Elevation, you know, Bethel, you know, I would love to hear those songs done in the style of your music. I think that'd be absolutely great.
And I think that is one thing
really fresh.
One thing that I have actually thought about previous. I recorded a cover not long ago of Oceans, I think. But nice. I'm just like, I'm not quite sure what to do with it. You know, I'm not quite sure what to do with these things because there's not really that music. Like, you could take it and translate it into a totally different style. You can do it. You know, it still has the same meaning behind it, but we get a bit of a beat down in the middle.
Yeah, I would love to hear that, if I'm honest. But like what we've talked about in previous weeks as well, is the idea that, you know, it's not necessarily dispensing with the songs, but actually is that and I think, Kyle, this kind of comes back to answering what you were saying about, you know, how do we cater to the people who like hip hop, the people who, you know, like all these different styles? Well, what styles do the people in your worship team like, and what styles do the people in your congregation like? You know, like, and there's got to be some synergy of that, because in theory, the people in your worship team are going to be a representation of the styles that people in the church like. And if you just kind of lean into those styles, I don't think there would be people who would like leave.
I think the tricky thing is that we don't really know, right? When's the last time you heard a worship team say, right, congregation, what music do you actually listen to? We don't. We just feed them what we think that they want. We just go, right, these are the songs that Hillsong are playing or Bethel are playing. Those are the songs you like, right? And they, to be honest, they probably don't. You know, if you're a worship musician, the last thing that you want to put on in the car sometimes is worship music. You know, you want to put something that you're like, right, I'm actually inspired to maybe create something. You know, I've always found that anyway. But well, that was before I listened to the album that Hillsong released with Cornerstone on. That album still blows my mind.
Yeah, you get like you're saying, like it's not stylistically the kind of Steve quoted spacey rock isn't necessarily like your style of music, and like that's not a bad thing or a negative thing, but like you will have those albums every now and then that, like you say, kind of talking about earlier, but like you have the song every now and then that just kind of holds a really special place for you. But you will have the album, won't you? Like the album Empires by Hillsong, like just like punches me in the gut every time I listen to it. It was just
album.
Yeah, it was like just the lyrical content in there and the creativity in the music. Like, but they were singing to God and singing to Jesus in a way that I'd never really heard before, and it was so much more intimate. It was so much more like relational, and it wasn't like. And don't get me wrong, I love the songs like How Great Is Our God and things like that. Do you know what I mean? Like they're powerful songs, and I've connected with God so much through those before. But that album for me was so much more intricate in the way that we relate as humans to God, and I was like, that's so beautiful. I want to get into question 3.
Let's do it.
So we like this question. So question 3 is so just taking, obviously I know you haven't been in the kind of church setting or worship culture for like a year, but obviously you've got like massives. See, I can't talk tonight. You'll have to deal with it. Of experience with it. But like, what would you, if you could change anything about modern worship culture, what would it be?
If I could change anything, I'd probably change the style of it personally. I think we've got to a point now where it's just we're playing the similar sort of thing. It's the same. Like, you have to diversify at some point, otherwise you get stagnant. You know, you spoke a little bit about Muse and how they changed over the years. It's a real tricky one, because you can't just say, right, we're playing this style now, because some people won't like it, and that's why we've got a bit stagnant. It's like we're just playing those, you know, 4 or 5 chords and these nice wishy-washy sort of sounds, and you could sing anything over them, and it's almost like, well, when are you going to actually not provoke, but maybe like, you know, ask the question, are you only coming for a show? Are you here to worship, or are you just putting on a show? Are you just showing off?
No, it's like I get what you're talking about, dude. Like, and it's obviously like we don't want to kind of paint everyone with the same brush, and like there's obviously the majority of people, well, I would hope, are there to worship. But like, I love what you said about like the thing you would change is the style, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm kind of taking that in the way of like, and the way like kind of the way you took that in what you were saying is like, this style has become this thing, and it's become like CCM, and this is what church sounds like, and this is what, and it's become this kind of like kind of corporate globule that we, like, it's now like it's a show, and it's a this and this and this, and it's become kind of disingenuous almost in some places.
It's like,
am I right in saying that? Is that what you mean?
It's like some big corporation has taken over the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And like, how would I explain that? It's like some big corporation has come in, and they're sort of putting little. It's like if you owned McDonald's, right? And you put little McDonald's everywhere. and you're like, right, this is what it's like. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. This is how you do it. Everyone does it the same, and it's almost like not Hillsong is this big bad, like, because obviously they do a lot of good stuff,
of course,
but it's like everybody in a church setting aspires to be them, instead of you're Kyle and you're trying to be me. Whereas be Kyle.
Yeah.
You know? Like, your church, be your church. I think a lot of that is maybe like writing your own content, I'd say. Like, if you're a church who has skilled musicians, people who write, people who want to be creative, you have to encourage them. You can't just say, oh, you creative people come into the church and you only play these songs, because eventually those creative people will go and be creative somewhere else. And I think we've experienced that over time. You know, we used to play a bit in the band together, didn't we? Outside of church, and Helen wants to write, wants to get into writing songs, and there has to be some kind of avenue for us to be creative in a worship setting. Because I've always felt that it's like, no, this is how we do it, and that's it.
Okay.
Instead of saying, well, how would you like to do it? You know?
Yeah.
And having it's almost like a control, like saying, no, this is how we do it, this is how we want it to be done. If you do it like that, then that's not how we do it.
It's also just an easy template, I guess. You know, if we're viewing it, you know, from a less insidious point of view as well. This is just like, if you like, they would probably think that they were giving the church a template to follow, because, like you say, like, actually, you know, coming at it from the flip side, writing your own material, finding your own style, finding your own way of expressing worship musically, stylistically, it requires something. It requires hard work, and obviously volunteers in a church may not have the kind of time and desire to do that, and so it's easy to just copy Hillsong. I'm not saying that's right at all, because I don't think it is. I think I think the way forward is, like you say, for people, churches to write their own content, and to embrace a musical style that naturally springs from within the congregation. But you can see how we've ended up here.
Yeah, so I'm like thinking about kind of just church as a whole, right? And not obviously we are the generation we're in, and the current kind of church culture we're experiencing is this kind of more like Hillsong and stuff like that. And I never want to like demonize that stuff, because, and I've said it before, like, they're amazing. They do some amazing things, and there's some beautiful, wonderful people involved in those churches. And like, looking back, like, now, like, you go to the older churches, and like, they were all doing hymns that other people wrote and things like that. Do you know what I mean? It's such a hard kind of world to navigate, because you're so right in what you're saying. We need to be us as a church. Like God's put like the identity of you, what you're doing, on you. Like God needs you to be you, because there isn't another you. Do you know what I mean? Like if there's two Kyles, then one of us is kind of obsolete. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, you need to do the thing that God's calling you to do. And it's like, you want to be able to navigate that in the most humble way you can, in a way that kind of like elevates the people around you, that doesn't kind of demonize the stuff that's going on outside. Like Steve's saying, it's this template that can be given out to churches if needed. It's a really useful thing. Do you know what I mean? Because, like, coming back to the volunteer thing, there's people out there who don't have the time to be writing their own music and stuff like that. Although it would be fantastic if every church could have homegrown music, because that's where, like, the heart of the church, to be able to be singing the heart of the church, would be glorious. I think it's the idea of, like, being able to take that kind of blank slate or that template and use it as like a stepping stone, and use it as what it's kind of intended for, instead of putting it up on this pedestal, which we've tended to do. And like, we see the stage and the lights, and we see this like almost like wow, like what, like rock stars. I said that before, and it's like you're taking the wrong message from it.
Yeah, it's a great like the big worship teams. They're a great stopping off point. They're a terrible destination, I would say. You know what I mean? If you're kind of trying to find an authentic way of expressing worship in your context, right? Because like like Matt, who we had on the previous week, he said, Hillsong are great at being Hillsong, but like what is your church great at being?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's it really, isn't it? It's just it's their like they should always be a jumping off point. Emulating these big worship teams should be a jumping off point into further creativity, because then I guess I'm kind of just bouncing this idea around, and everything I say I have the right to change my mind, as everyone does, but it's like also it's kind of like, well, volunteers, they don't have time to write songs, but actually they make time for their hobbies. Like they make time for hours and hours of gaming. They they make time. You know what I mean? They make time for sitting there and spending a whole evening doing a jigsaw. And like you say, Bryn, like it's with the technology that's available to us, it is not a difficult thing. Like me and Rob Westall, who me and Carl both play for, we sat down and did a songwriting session the other evening. I bought, speaking of Rage Against the Machine, I bought a Digitech Whammy for my birthday, and it's an amazing, amazing pedal. It's so much fun, and it's inspired me to write new riffs. And so we took this riff I'd written, put some chords around it, wrote a song, and then literally the next day I was able to demo out all the guitar parts. And
it's like it's easy as that.
Exactly, that's something I recorded to click, and that's something that Carl could very easily record drums to. Someone else could record bass to. So actually, the ease with which we can, because nobody ever needs to hear that demo, but like it's good enough for like a band to learn the song.
I think creativity is hard though, and you almost have to be in a certain position for you to be effective. I talk about that from my point of view, like from myself. I think I haven't been as creative as I have been in the last 2 years ever in my life. Musically, anyway. But I think that's because I've put myself in that position, if that makes sense. Because I've been, three nights a week for 3 hours, I'm dedicated to streaming my music on Twitch. It's like I've given myself that opportunity to be creative, So as far as creativity goes, there has to be some kind of, routine or some kind of dedicated practice that you put in, like practically now, that kind of helps you to be more creative. You can't be creative if you're just going to go, I'm a creative person, and you just sit there and do nothing. Nothing's ever going to happen. Yeah. You're not ever going to make any progress, Advice for, anybody who's starting maybe music or, learning, like, your students too, Kyle, is set yourself some time, even if it's 2 hours for 2 days a week, and you will progress. There's going to be some kind of progression to your learning or your creativity. If you put a session in a week that you're like, right, I'm just going to create something. I'm just going to create something from you. You do a session every week that's like, right, I'm just going to practice this particular set of chords or this particular scale. It's those kind of little things that will add up over the years of you playing music that will actually get you to a point where you're like, okay, I can actually do this, and I can actually make my own music, and this is how I want it to sound. But that's just a little practical thing that you can actually do if you just set some time during the week. It doesn't even have to be long. It can be an hour at a time.
No, it's right. Like you kind of both said it there, and I think you can make excuses and kind of go, like I said, like volunteers, you don't really have time, and obviously there's people out there that don't. Like, there's people out there who are working 2-3 jobs and stuff like that, and that's a completely different situation. But you are right. Like, I think we need to prioritize our, like, if we are involved in worship teams, we need to like prioritize that far more, and not just treat it as this kind of hobby on the side where we rock up on a Sunday and we'll blag it. And like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think we need to prioritize it more. We need to go, okay. And don't get me wrong, I love a good binge of a TV show. Like, I'm doing it now. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and there's I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if we're not putting the time in to work on our craft within that worship context and going, you know what, like, homegrown worship would be amazing here. Like you said, like, let's use this template we've got from Hillsong and all that stuff. And okay, how does that look for us? But like you said, Bryn, creativity takes time and it takes hard work. So are we willing, as members of a worship team, are we willing to actually carve out time to do that instead of just going, we'll just copy a Hillsong track because that's easier, instead of taking something or growing something that is the heart of your church that you're involved with.
Especially if you've got a lot of people as well, you know, that's a real big struggle, because people are people, you know, you're not going to agree with everyone. You're not going to disagree with everyone, but that doesn't mean there's not going to be people who have an ego in there, because musicians are probably the most ego-driven people I know, you know?
I'm a drummer. I wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. We're in the back.
You're like, I'm the best guitarist in the world. Like, dude, no. But it's really tricky because you have to deal with other people, right? Even when you're in a band of 4 people, it's still difficult then. You know, imagine a worship team who have 50 people. How are you going to deal with those people? You know, I'm sure you know when you've been in a band, it's like, no, that's not how this song is going to go. And he's like, the other guitarist, like, no, that's how the song goes. They're like, yeah, but you're not listening. That's not how it should go. It should go like this. You know, it's a very tricky thing with people who are creative, because I think that's why it's a good thing that I do a lot of stuff on my own. I don't have anyone to answer to. I just create what I want. You know, nobody can tell me it's bad. Nobody can tell me it's wrong.
Oh, maybe you don't want me coming to play drums for you then, bro.
Yeah, the track's already finished. Sorry, mate.
I'm just going to be changing it mid-gig. I'll be like, sorry, bro.
This part's half-time. No, it's double time.
But then I guess, like, yeah, then the flip side again, if we come full circle again, is it's just like, if it feels like too much to ask people to prioritize creativity for their worship team, for their expression of church, how do we make it more appealing? Then one thing we could do is make it more stylistically appealing, right? You know what I mean? Like, if it's more stylistically appealing for musicians, then they're going to want to pour time into it.
Yeah,
True.
and it's such a hard
But
question, because then
you're
like,
in a circle. Then
okay,
again,
what does that
aren't you?
mean? Yeah, because what does that mean then? Because you know, you may have like a buddy of mine, his like one of his favorite bands is like ABBA. Like, I can't stand ABBA. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if you were to do stylistic, you'd be like, hey, let's sound like this. Like, you'd be like, yes, I'm well up for that, and I'd be like, I'm good. Like, do you know what I mean? So it's like, how do you navigate like trying to pick the right stylistic thing so that people get excited and like you're right in one sense of like we're human, aren't we? Of course style matters. Of course it does. Like, I think we're kidding ourselves if we got that false thing of like, oh, it doesn't matter, like, okay, I'll just do whatever. I don't know what that voice was, but I enjoyed it. Like, but it has to there has to be this deeper connection to the thing as a whole of what you're doing. So like I've been in, you know, situations where I've been involved in the worship team, and like, well, we're doing that song again. Okay. All right. We've been doing that song for the past 3 years, every Sunday. Okay. All right. But like, I can't I can't sit in that attitude. Of course, that's my initial attitude because, like, you know,
What song was it?
I don't want to say.
Happy Day.
Like,
Happy Day.
do you mean? But you can't sit in that reaction and just then go, oh well, you know what? I'm not gonna get excited. I'm not gonna worship. I'm not gonna like engage with the people around me. I'm not gonna like lift up the people around me because I'm unhappy with the style. It's like there's something bigger there that you can go, you know what? Okay, I may not like this style particularly, or this song that's been played 3,000 times today, but like I can still, I know we were talking about earlier, it's different, isn't it? It is different. Like worship is different than just a normal like gig or song or whatever, because there's something about it that even if stylistically isn't something you genuinely connect with, if that relationship for you with Jesus is there, like
It doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter, but these stylistic approaches do help. Bryn, it was a pleasure to have you on. Like, it's been lockdown and I haven't actually seen you in person for ages, so it was honestly, for me as a friend, it was amazing having you on. And dude, it was so good.
Thank you.
Short and sweet, I love it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we'll see you at the same time next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. We hope that you got as much from it as we did. We would absolutely love to have you all involved in these conversations, so please find us at Instagram and YouTube, both under the handle at Deconstructing Worship. And please send in any emails with any questions or anything that you would love involved within any kind of future episodes. And our email is deconstructingworship@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.